Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. So, a bit of a strange topic, I suppose people might be thinking for today in terms of talking about winter fodder on the 14th of July. But I suppose I was in West Cork a couple of months ago, probably it was the month of April, towards the end of the month of April, with a discussion group down there. And one farmer described the month of April at that time as being a long, hard pull, is how he described it. So it was a slow month of April for growth, obviously. And how he was portraying it was basically that it was a big effort to get through April from the point of view that there wasn't a lot of grass growing and there was a lot of effort required to keep cows fed, etc. And that it wasn't the most kind month of April. And I suppose when you think back about it then in a way, we didn't get off to a good start in the month of April, and by no manner of means do I want to be excessively negative now in this sense, but it meant that we were coming into the month of May without a whole lot of building up or potential for grass to build up. So we were a little bit behind before we even started. And I think that description of the month of April is nearly a good description of the year, from my perception anyway, in the area that I'm covering. And it possibly is true further north and west as well, but with a slightly different context. So from the West Cork point of view, it's been an exceptionally dry year, kind of just struggling along in terms of just about maybe keeping grass growing, but not a lot of it. And there has been silage fed, and even I'm in the North Cork area where I live, and there are lads around us here in Mitchelstown that have quite a significant amount of silage put into their diets already over the course of the summer to try and keep their growth and demand in balance. And from that point of view, there is a possibility that there could be a deficit of silage on farms going into next winter. Now, Joe and Pierce have just kind of reported results of a very recent fodder survey, which was only completed last week. And that would show that there is 20%, potentially 20% surplus on farms, but there's variation within that survey sample that would show that there are farms that are in deficit for silage stocks at the moment. And the reason I'm talking about it on the 14th of July is that it's twofold. The second cuts are started in a lot of places at this stage now, so we will be able to make an assessment following those as to what our position is. Is there a requirement for a third cut? Is there a requirement to source something else to fill the gap that we may have, that may be manifesting itself within our farm? And what are those options going to be then will be the other thing that people will have to consider. So I've had queries lately about whole cropping, taking whole crop wheat, whole crop oats, whole crop barley, etc. And they are all options, and they are potential solutions for people. But again, all of these will be very case specific. What will work for one farmer may not work for another farmer. There's concerns then in relation to maybe meal availability. My information would suggest that won't be as big a concern as people might have had at once, but it's not going to be cheap. So obviously, look, there's no feed source cheap, but at the same time, no matter what way we go about it, given fertilizer prices, grass is going to be the cheapest feed anyway, in spite of the fertilizer price increase. Silage is going to be the next, or forage, and then meal is going to be at that upper end of the scale again in terms of feeding. Obviously, in terms of consistency, we obviously have a lot of control, or there's greater control over the quality of the feed that you're feeding when you are feeding meal, but we can only feed a certain amount of it. We can't slug feed animals with that kind of, with very high energy material like concentrate. So we do need a certain proportion of forage, and that comes in the form of either silage, predominantly obviously being the main one in that we use, but can also maybe incorporate straw or maybe hay. They can all help to fill the gap. So I suppose the purpose of today is to maybe look at your position in terms of where you are with feed. Maybe, as I said, it's only just to get you thinking about it. In the meantime, we'll say as second cuts will start to be done, we'll get a better handle on what silage is in yards. And as I said, it's going to vary even within parishes, I would say, almost to a certain extent, we'll say, or definitely within areas or regions within counties, there will be variation. So depending on what weather circumstances have prevailed. So as I said, we have sections around here in North Cork that have a lot of silage fed. We've also sections within North Cork that have probably a nice bit of silage made as well, just because that their soil type is more suited to the way the weather has been, maybe not stocked as high maybe as some other farms, that kind of scenario. So it's going to be very specific. I suppose the other thing that's important to point out here is that Joe has been very, from his time when he was the nutrition specialist before he took over the Dairy KT position, has been adamant that we should be looking at fodder surveying on an annual basis and not just in crisis situations. So a lot of this probably did stem from the war in Ukraine, creating a concern that there may not be available concentrates. We'll say that grain and corn are going to become difficult to get, and that we may need to be becoming more self-sufficient. So we had our tillage incentive scheme put in place to get people to sow more tillage crops, and we also had the red silage scheme, or the red clover silage scheme as well, introduced in order to try to encourage people in the absence of nitrogen, we'll say, or with reduced usage of nitrogen, to be able to grow crops of silage, to make sure that we would be relatively self-sufficient in terms of silage. And as I said, it's not a massive concern at the moment. As I said, the survey that the lads spoke about there in the last couple of days would suggest that we're in a good position, but there is individual variation within farms and so forth. And again, this is the purpose of today, is just to give people an idea of how to go about assessing their fodder stocks and so forth. So we have two ways that you can do it, and I suppose the ideal way from our perspective is through pasture base. So Michal will have spoken about this to many of you, maybe at different stages, or you may have come across it, Michal O'Leary being the coordinator of pasture base. So we have the option in pasture base of actually submitting or completing a fodder budget there, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we also have an interactive calculator on the Teagasc website that people that aren't associated with pasture base, or maybe aren't associated with pasture base yet, can fill out that there. The advantage of the pasture base one, obviously, is that information is saved on pasture base, and Michal can draw down information like that then at varying stages to give us a picture, which is what Joe is ideally looking for, is that at any one stage you can actually decipher what the forage position is, well, get a snapshot of what the fodder position is across the country if people are keeping some sort of information on pasture base. The interactive calculator, it's available to you, obviously, and you get a picture of what that is for your own farm, but that data has not been saved anywhere for us. So if 200 people go on to the interactive calculator and complete fodder budgets, we will have no information coming back out of that as to whether they're in a good position or a bad position. So, excuse me. So as I said, if for people that aren't involved in pasture base, you just simply Google, and I'm just looking to my left here now because I had to write it down here. If you just put Teagasc grass silage stock checker, so that's Teagasc grass silage stock checker into Google, it will bring you to our page on our website that will give you a lot of information in relation to fodder and calculating your stocks, etc. And as I said, that's there for everybody to use, and we would recommend that people, whether you're on pasture base or not, obviously, ideally, if you're on pasture base, you just go through pasture base, and I'll show you that in a second. But if you're not, if you're concerned about your fodder, or even if you're not concerned about your fodder, but would just like to establish what your quantities are, you can use that. So just Google Teagasc grass silage stock checker, and that'll bring you to the page that you need to get to. So I'll just show you the pasture base side of things then. I'll just share screen here now. So this is actually the web page that I'm talking about. So if you put in Teagasc grass, it's a bit of a mouthful, grass silage stock checker, it'll bring you to this Grassland Calculators page, and you can see here that you can check grass silage calculator here, and we've grass calculator here, which is a thing that was done by Brian McCarthy a good few years ago. And then there's also an Excel, but I would say probably use grass silage stock checker because the Excel is a little bit more complicated, I suppose. So use that grass silage stock checker if you're not in pasture base. On pasture base, this is just an example of a budget that I've put together there this morning, just in preparation for today. So you just find it under here. So we'll be talking about grass budgets a lot of time in relation to pasture base. Sorry, I just need to move this out of the way here. This is probably blocking your view. So just it's under the budget section here, and predominantly we'll be talking about grass budgets in this scenario. But if you click on this fodder budget, I'm not going to click on it here now because I actually have it open already. But you just click on that, you'll get the option of creating a new one there, or you'll get if you've already one saved, you can put in that you can click on that and open that up again and maybe edit it or modify it or whatever way you need to go, okay? So in terms of like loads of different options here, and we're obviously talking about in a dairy context predominantly here, but you can see that we have suckler cows, calves, suckler cows, etc. Store cattle, finishing steers, heifers, bulls, ewes, lambs included here. What I've included here are milking cows, dry cows, milking cows in early lactation, and our in-calf heifers and weaning our yearling heifer scenarios as well, okay? So basically, there's a little bit of thinking to go into this, not too much in reality, I suppose, but just, I think I'd always err on the side of having a little bit too much of a demand rather than not, and having enough so that you can match your stock to that, or at least set your bar at the right, roughly the right level. So the context that I'm operating in here is a 100 cow herd, and I'm basically saying that there's any time from mid-October on, there's a chance that there's going to be silage going into those animals, possibly by night or whatever. So I'm saying that from mid-October through to the end of November, there's potential that we're going to be on silage at a half rate, basically. So, and then obviously into the month of December, more than likely we're going to be housed fully at that stage. A lot of herds milking up to kind of the start of, or to just before Christmas. So I'm kind of saying 45 days there where we're going to be feeding silage to milking cows. I'm suggesting that they're going to, that's kind of averaging it out as half that time, basically. So, and I'm saying that there's 100 cows there, and look, that will probably be a little bit heavy-handed, but as I said, I'd rather be on the upper side rather than on the lower side. I'm saying that we're going to be at that time of the year, generally speaking, it kind of is economically justifiable to be feeding in or around 3 kilos to late lactation milking cows, and will probably be the case again this year given the milk price and so forth. And the other advantage of it is, I suppose, it just does keep a bit of condition. It will keep condition on cows, assuming that we're on moderate, if we're on good quality silage and they're milking well. So we will be putting in some feed here, and you can see the advantage of that feed piece here, which we won't have on, or which isn't on the interactive calculator, is that on the website, is that it'll actually start giving you an idea of what kind of meal you might be talking about having to feed as well, okay? Then I've moved on to a spring situation. So again, here I'm saying from kind of like February through to mid-March, probably a potential for half rate silage. So that's kind of roughly 50 days there, and maybe silage by night or whatever, or bits of silage going in. So again, trying to account for that again. And I'm saying that George always talks about a 70, 20, 10 calving pattern. So if we have 100 cows, we should have 70 of them calved in February. And again, it's rough and coarse, but it's going to be there or thereabouts. So I'm saying that there's potentially 70 cows going to be getting silage, half rate silage, basically for 25 days, equivalent of 25 full days equivalent there. And you can see that it's giving them a dry matter intake there, so their DMI isn't as high because they're only building up, obviously, etc. And we're saying that we're feeding these cows 4 kgs a meal at that point in time as well. So that I would say, assuming that they're out in grass by day, maybe that kind of scenario. So as I said, it's not an exact science. It's kind of tweaking it around a little bit. And again, you can see the amount of meal that we're talking about having to use there. Just again, it can give you a little guidelines in terms of what kind of quantities you're going to be talking about. And then I'm saying that we have 3 months then, and again, this is going to vary very dramatically depending on areas. So I'm saying a 3-month winter because I'm pretty much accounting for another month. As you can see, I've nearly 70 days between these two combined here. And if we have that, we'd say that's 35 days, which is giving us another month. So that's kind of saying a 4-month winter period. And that will be generally typical of a lot of the farms that we deal with. But then obviously there are farms that have 5 and potentially even 6-month winters on heavier soils as well. So you would have to adjust the plan in order to account for that, obviously. So as I said, a kind of a 3-month dry period there. Again, depending on, you can tweak this around obviously as you require. And you can see that you can update it here as well. So anytime you make a change, just make sure you hit update there to make sure that it does update. My in-calf heifers, I'm actually thinking, in reality, I probably picked up a bit of the silage that they're going to consume here by when I have my 120 days in here. So you could actually say that could come back to possibly 90 days because they'll move into the milking herd at that stage, and they will start to be picked up in the upper figures up above. So I've updated that there. Hopefully it'll update now that I had logged onto it earlier. It may not. But also then obviously with yearling cattle, and I suppose we've them in for a longer winter period. Again, depending on your farm setup and so forth. I know a couple of farms that have out farms that can carry young stock for quite a long period of time into Christmas, right up to Christmas. So their winter period can be quite short from that point of view. So again, as I said, it'll depend on farm specific scenarios for all of you when you're doing this. Okay. So this isn't going to update here now. So, but we'll just leave it as it is. It might update in a minute. So you can see that there's a total required there of 245.41 tonne of dry matter, and we've 20.5 tonne of ration put in there between the 7 tonne of early lactation feed and the 13.5 tonne that we're putting into the cows in the late part of lactation this year. And as I said, then just, I suppose I put in 2 very approximate pits here in terms of what's available. So 25 meters long by 10 meters wide by 2.5 meters high, average height. Average height is an important piece there. So what's the height of it at the back of the pit? What's the height of it at the bottom or at the front of the pit? And then an approximate average there. So what it calculates that up, then you can adjust the dry matter there if you change your dry matter on the basis of an analysis that you get done. You can obviously tweak that as well, and that will tell you the available dry matter on the farm. So you can see in this example here, we're saying that it's 26%, and that the 2 pits are basically the same size, same area has been cut there, and same amount generated basically. So we're saying that there's 106 tonne of dry matter available from both of those. So in this, this isn't going to fucking play ball with me now basically, because it's not updating, but and that's purely driven by the fact that I was logged on to this before I came onto the webinar, and because it's been sitting idle, it's probably not updated from that point of view. That won't happen if you're working as normal, I suppose, if you go in and sit in to do it. So as I said, we've 211 tonne basically of dry matter here. I had 80 bales of straw put in there, whether they're going to be used for feeding or for a bit of bedding. But basically, if they were to be used for feeding, they would be contributing dry matter to it. And maybe people will be feeding straw, obviously, as they're trying to dilute down quality of silage, maybe to not have cows putting on excess condition or whatever. So straw will come into the mix there as well. I suppose the reason I hadn't any bales in here is actually I do feel, I get the perception that there isn't a huge, talking to guys that I know well, there isn't a huge amount of silage after being made in terms of surplus silage. No, so that would potentially mean that that's where the deficit could potentially be coming from, I would think, in some cases. And my intention was to actually input a few bales there basically to solve the difference that we're going to see below here. But I suppose just long and short of it is basically that our total requirement in terms of tons of dry matter was 245 tons. We had, on the basis of what was in the pits and the straw that we have available, we have 200 and just shy of 222. So that leaves us with a 25 ton deficit basically, which means we have 90% of what we require. And you can see here that it's also putting it into terms of days short. So it mightn't seem like a lot. I suppose it's a week of shortage is, some people would say that's not short, but it is. Like if we were to get another April like we had this year, next year, and you're 7 days short, you could potentially be very quickly 37 days short basically. So we need, it comes up in red there, obviously, that you need to source more fodder or sell surplus stock. So again, that's going to be case specific. People are going to make different decisions on the basis of what the figures show them, etc. I suppose the other thing is that that is really, in one way, well, I've said it already, I'm probably building in a buffer in terms of the figures that I've calculated there. I have a very good friend whose dad used to always say that column of silage was like money in the bank, and I think that's a very, very, very important statement for people to keep in their heads, and to have that kind of objective always, to have a reserve of silage there. We've had too many close escapes, I suppose, and some people haven't escaped in the past couple of years where we've run short of feed. And as a result, there's been excess pressure put on basically, because it's a stressful time trying to source fodder, especially at that. If this is occurring and you're conscious of it going into the winter, you've time to be working on it, and options may be available to you. If we get a very difficult period coming out of the spring, heading into the summer of next year, there could be a lot more people looking for fodder at that stage as well. as well as just the actual availability of it, obviously, because it's been, a lot of it has been used up during the course of the winter, becomes an issue too. So from that point of view, that's why I'm talking about this today, getting people to consider their options. What are the options that are available out there? And again, this is very, very important. Then there are some options that are out there that people could consider. I'll just stop sharing that because it's just going to be spinning around there. There are, as I said, whole crop, maize, etc. They're all options that people could consider, but people need to be set up for them. So from point of view of maize and whole crop in particular, rats and birds are a major burden that people need to be prepared for. And again, talking to people that have used these feeds in the past, the recommendation would be that you would be preparing to have them coming into your yard in advance of them actually coming into your yard. So trying to control any rodent burden that may be in the yard already. Again, that's not an issue with grass silage, obviously, because they're not as interested in grass silage as they will be in maize and whole crop. And then bird damage is obviously a major issue. So bird damage can occur to silage pits as well, but they will absolutely decimate whole crop and maize pits if people aren't prepared or don't protect them sufficiently. So good covers are going to be required in those scenarios. In terms of availability, I suppose there will be consideration. Maybe you have to put a cost on those crops, obviously, to whole crop them for people that are looking at growing them to sell at the moment. As actual standing crops, you'll have to match their valuation on them. And I suppose the best case scenario there, our best thing to do there is talk to your own advisors individually to put a valuation on them. None of these options are going to be cheap. And I would say that you need to consider your ability to feed these out. And there's also losses associated with these as well. So sometimes, like if you have 70%, 50 to 70% of your forage requirement available, then you have ways and means of actually finding your way out of the hole, basically through feeding concentrate. And as I said, it is going to be dear. But if sometimes you need to balance that in the context of I don't have a great setup for keeping maize or keeping whole crop, or I'm not prepared for it, or I don't have a pit space for it. Some people have baled whole crop in the past unsuccessfully, really, because it just gets damaged. People are baling maize now as well, but again, that is an option. Again, they're expensive, but there is a lot of feed value in those bales probably. But again, they have to be minded quite carefully as well, and they will not carry from one year to the next. So I suppose basically what I'm getting at there is maybe people need to assess their silage stocks and then make a decision as to what will work for them on their farm. So what I mean by that is that sometimes it might be just, even though it might be slightly dearer, it might actually be cheaper potentially in the long run, if that makes any sense, to use your standard rations, etc., that would be available over the winter. They get blown into bins. They're safe from birds pretty much, unless they're spilt on the ground. Obviously, rats and so forth can't get at them either. And the actual amount of it that you use is very much within your control in terms of if you moved off stock sooner or whatever, and you didn't require as much, you don't have to order the next load. Whereas with the forage crops, you're buying 10 acres or something, you are taking that 10 acres. And in many cases, some people find, ironically, that they end up using it up in order to get it out of the way for the yard for next year, or just using it up, as I said, because it doesn't carry well from one year to the other in terms of storage of maize. Not from the point of view that it doesn't hold well, but it's always vulnerable to attack from rodents and birds and so forth. And the negative of that then is that people end up kind of maybe feeding that into going into April to try to use it up. As I said, you're putting in a feed then that you've paid maybe quite a bit for. You're using it up then just for the sake of using it up, and that can actually have an impact then in terms of grassland management as well, in terms of throwing you off at the start of the second rotation maybe next year. So a lot of little bits and pieces that people have to consider when thinking of their fodder situation. And it's important that people sit down and just get a handle on where they're at, where you're going to be in terms of stock numbers for the winter. Can you reduce the stock numbers maybe, or can you acquire the feed? Possibly, I suppose the big concern that's out there is that the crops of silage that would have been sold in the past, or the bales of silage that would be up on Dundee subsequently, later in the year from people that would have cut crops and baled them and stored them with a view to selling them. They may not be there this year because of fertilizer costs being high. People won't be speculating. Basically, contractor costs are high as well. People maybe will be trying to avoid having costs incurred that they aren't sure of recouping basically through sale of stock of silage. So just be conscious of that avenue, we'll say, or that get out of jail card that people may have been relying on in the past may not be available. And from that point of view, we do need to make an assessment of our fodder stock situation. And as I said, it's strange to be talking about it on the 14th of July, but it tees it up nicely from the point of view of next week. I'm going to talk about actually building grass. And building grass is part of the whole trying to minimize the amount of winter feed that's required, or keeping cows out for as long as possible, obviously, which will help to minimize feed requirements or winter feed requirements as well. And I'm not saying that that's the solution to try if there is a deficit in your fodder budget, but it is all going to help. And I suppose, especially with young stock as well, as I said there, some people can keep young stock out for quite a period of time. So what's the balance between maybe taking a third cut to create extra forage and not cutting yourself short in terms of how long those young stock can stay out on the farm into the winter period as well? And then I suppose we have to allow for that inclement weather kind of scenario as well. So it's important that when you do your sums that you probably add, I would say, at least a fifth onto that to make sure that you have it. And I think just purely from the point of view, some people can handle this stress. Personally, I just don't think it's a good idea for people to be running tight on silage on an ongoing basis. And the people that have run tight on it in the past would often say that they won't be tightening it again. Some people like to live on the edge and find it as a kind of a motivating factor to get out in the springtime. I don't think that that's a good way to be operating. I think you should be just operating on the basis of making sure that there's plenty there, and that you'll have enough and that you have the options if it comes to it. Running out of silage, while it might force you out in the springtime in terms of getting out and grazing and so forth, that's grand. But if you hit a dip or hit a blip at some point, then at that stage, and you don't have anything to go back to, then your hands are fairly tight. So I don't think that's a good position for people to be putting themselves in for their own heads to be managing that, okay? So that's it for today. As I said, strange one to be talking about on the 14th of July, but as I said, it's teeing up nicely for talking about building grass, which we do have to start thinking about in the month of July, because if we're going to be successful at it, we have to start early, especially at higher stocking rates.